Friday night, under the lights, in front of the TV cameras, and we were all hoping for a positive reaction after that Sunderland defeat. What we saw was nothing short of a shambles, really. Glenn, you missed the fun last week. Now, you may have thought you missed the annual heavy defeat, but it seemed like it was more of the same on Friday. I don't think they really learnt many lessons at all.
No, we were brilliant for the first 15 seconds, and then we gave the ball away, and the ball ended up in our net from our own kickoff after 21 seconds, as we all saw. Yeah, quite a special start when you would think that you'd be just trying to keep things tight at the opening of a game, which is, at the end of the day, was against the team that's favourites to win the league this year. So it was always going to be a very difficult game. And, letting in a goal after 21 seconds obviously sets the tone for the rest of the game. And to be honest, we didn't really do anything other than be a complete and utter shambles whenever Leicester had the ball. For 90 minutes, 2-0 down after, about 15, when we gave the ball away yet again, close to our goal. Got one back through putting their defence under a little bit of pressure. And from then till half-time, we actually looked quite decent. And it didn't look beyond the realms of possibility that we'd get back into it. And just when a normal team would have some sort of game management and get to half time, just the 2-1 down, and then you can change a few things, tweak a few things, and then hopefully get back into it second half. We let in another goal with horrendous, weak defending, people bouncing off of tackles, people not picking up runners. Our midfield didn't track a runner all game, so every time a midfield player from Leicester got forward, he basically was totally free on the edge of the box. And 3-1, and the game's virtually over. I thought at half time we could have made some substitutions to make a difference. Personally, I'd have put Holgate on, even though he had a shocker last weekend, and put Charles in midfield. So at least then you'd have had Charles and Downs, some sort of midfield structure, perhaps. But he made a like-for-like substitution, which all that really did was take off our best attacker, Radosi, and put on Sulemana. So, yeah, first 10 minutes of the second half, again, we looked the better side, and then we coughed up what is possibly the biggest joke goal you've ever seen. I mean, one player running through from 70 yards out, and all we've got in defence is one player on the halfway line who can't tackle and can't run. So, again, a horrendous structural mistake to be left like that, and the rest of the game kind of petered out. And then, just to add insult to injury, we got one sent off in the last minute, which was a bit of a Bobby Madley special, because I don't think Bobby hadn't been involved enough in the game up till that point. Hadn't had too much to do, so he decided to have people talking about him for the last minute. But Bobby Madley is not the reason we lost. I just thought the way we set up, the way we went about it, I couldn't see what the defensive structure was supposed to be when we didn't have the ball. I mean, we're doing all this very clever, allegedly inverted fullback thing, which is a stupid term, doesn't make any sense. So we were kind of three at the back when we had the ball. But when we didn't have the ball, I had no idea who was supposed to be where. And Harwood Bellis was completely on his own in defence half the time. Manning supported him a little bit, but no one else was there. Shay Charles was wide right. I don't know what Smallbone was doing defensively. He just nowhere. And Downs had a terrible game till he got injured. It was just awful. When we get to the game against Ipswich and he picks the team, only really Gavin Bazunu can be sure of his place, or should be sure of his place to start, because everyone else was dreadful. Some were more dreadful than others, but it was just a shocking performance by management, players, everything really.
Going to get on to, we'll talk about the red card, of course, but we'll get on to some of the biggest issues, what the pressing issues are for us and what they have to do to sort that out. But, I mean, Steve, is this worse than anything we've seen for quite a few years? Because to me, it felt like it driving home on Friday. I mean, we've been bad before, but 2 heavy defeats in a row, and it doesn't look like it's going to change.
difficult to tell because you always kind of want to put it in context of who you're up against. I mean, it's weird that people are, various journalists who are obviously good personal friends of Enzo Maresca have been working themselves up into a bit of a frenzy this season about how Leicester are changing how Championship football is going to be played. When literally only last season Vincent Kompany had Burnley playing passing football. It's not a novel concept at this level for Guillaume Balaguer's benefit. But yeah, it's just frustrating that I think kind of from the start we all probably looked at that lineup and thought, ooh, that midfield is looking short-handed. Because while Adam Armstrong has looked quite good in that sort of deep role, pushing forward in attack when we are attacking, the problem is that if you're then putting the two smaller players in Downs and Smallbone, if those are your two pivots, then we've basically got no strength in that midfield at all. And that was basically why Shea Charles was bought in the first place. He was bought to play defensive midfield, so play him defensive midfield. We've looked a much better structure when he's been playing in that position. That half an hour against Norwich and the whole game at Plymouth where he got man of the match, deservedly so. And all of a sudden, because of an injury and because Mason Holgate had an absolute shambles of a game on debut, we've decided, oh no, safety net is to put him back in defence. But all that does is expose the back four to runners from midfield, because Downs and Smallbone don't track the runners. That's their role in the Russell Martin system isn't really defensive. So you do need somebody who is of a defensive mind, and Charles certainly is that, to basically sit in front of the back four and shuttle across and do that defensive work. And we've seen that obviously he's already shown that he's capable of doing that. But yeah, without him in that slot, all of a sudden the midfield is just weak, and you can just drive a bus through it. And as a result, it means that the attack gets blunted, because all of a sudden we're all dropping 10, 20 yards because the opposition are running at us, and unsurprisingly, it scares defenders and teams when the opposition are running at you. And in a game where we could easily have been making the running, as we were for, as Glenn said, about 20, 25 minutes at the back end of that first half, where we were well on top. Once we go 3-1 down, you're then back into that situation of, well, Leicester are going to be quite happy just to sit in and pick us off on the break. And I mean, as he said, that fourth goal is the sort of goal that teams score in the 94th, 95th minute when you're only a goal down and you've thrown everybody forward.
Or kids at school.
But you've ended up somehow with our last man being Smallbone on the edge of the centre circle in their half, and they've had four players run past him. And it's like, how does that even happen? And that's like on the hour mark. It's just absolutely mental that we've got ourselves into that lack of shape and lack of positional discipline. I know, let's be honest, we were warned about this sort of stuff with Russell Martin from Swansea fans, and yeah, we certainly saw them concede a fair few shambolic goals, but I'd be surprised if any of them were quite at that level.
Yeah.
And it's concerning. He can come out and say that he's proud of his players after the game, but the more you come out with nonsense like that, the quicker people are gonna make a snap judgment. Because while I think at the start of the season, obviously patience was the optimal word. People were sort of being asked to be patient. Mistakes are going to be made. We're not going to win every game. There will be defensive howlers. At the end of the day, we saw plenty of that last season, so nobody was under any illusions there. But the second you start coming out and basically trying to tell people that the sky is pink when it's blue, people aren't stupid. They can see what's in front of their eyes. It's not football is a complex game in many ways, but the very basics are very basic, and people can see that we're a defensive shambles, and
Yeah,
that
we're
comes
not
down
doing
to the
those right.
coaching.
Yeah.
That comes to the coaching team and the analysts and stuff, and it's not good enough, frankly.
Yeah,
I mean,
he could maybe get away with saying that if we were losing games by the odd goal, but we've been absolutely smashed 2 games running. So
to be
as
fair,
Steve
Nathan
said,
Jones lost games by the odd goal, and he didn't get away with saying that sort of thing either. So
no, we've been
But
annihilated.
then
twice
nobody
running.
liked Nathan Jones. That was
No.
the thing. Nobody was willing to give him that that extra long bit of rope, because at the end of the day, he didn't need a long bit of rope. Russell Martin's come in and up until the last 2 weeks has largely said the right things. After Sunderland, yeah, okay, it was a complete mess, and he said so, and he kind of accepted responsibility for it. But coming out after a game like Friday nights, where at the end of the day we've probably played worse overall than we did at Sunderland, and saying that he's proud of the players and this sort of stuff. No, I'm sorry, that's just nonsense.
Alfie, he deserves a bit of criticism, I think, because of the goals that we've conceded. But there's not a lot you can do about the individual errors. To a certain extent, that's on the players, right? And I think the interview with Carl Walker-Peters afterwards was interesting, and he was saying, "Well, we're not doing what he's asking us to do." So, I mean, how much of the blame do they need to take for the current predicament?
yeah, well, I think that's really interesting to listen to you, Steve and Glenn, to be fair, because it's quite interesting to hear. I don't agree that it was worse than Sunderland. I don't think it was. I think the Sunderland one was definitely a worse performance. Defensively, they were a shambles, but sort of as you said, Martin, to concede a goal in the 21st second of the game is absolutely ludicrous, and that's just simple passing. They haven't tried anything expansive. They haven't tried to invite pressure and play around it, but they've just tried to play a simple pass, giving it away, and then everybody's too slow to react. The second goal is very similar. Sworn as a stitched Carl Walker-Peters up a little bit with a shocking pass, and then I thought that Taylor Harwood-Bellis, I'm sure that he'll be a really good player this season, but I thought he could have just diverted the ball anywhere but towards where it went at the back post and in. And then, like Glenn said, they were in the game. It wasn't awful for the rest of the first half. They were in the game. They could have been in at 2-1. I think there's a couple of misses as well. But then to give that goal away in half time again, just as they did for Pierre Ekwa just at half time at Sunderland, if you look at the goal, why is Samadozi in that position? And that's management for sure, or his players not doing their job. Why is Samadozi the one that's tackling on the edge of the area? And then when he's beaten, Flynn Downs, if you look at the goal, his 2 centre-backs are to the left shoulder of him. The ball goes through to the right to a runner, and he just lets them walk on. He lets them carry on and lets them roll right through. There's absolutely no defence at all, no defence of the back four at all. So I think players have to take responsibility. When it's gone on for 2 or 3 years, they have to accept that. I know it's a different group, but they've not been good enough. There was missed chances, like I said. I think that they created a fair bit, actually. If you look at the stats alone, and stats don't tell football's not played with stats, but they did create chances, which they didn't do at Sunderland. I think they played into Leicester's box like 2 or 3 times more than Leicester did into the Southampton box. But every single time they got towards the final third, they were completely unmarked, and they were able just to walk on through. I do think Gavin Bazunu had another good game, to be fair to him.
He did.
Obviously, yeah, he did well. Good couple of saves, and his distribution was really good as well. But it was interesting listening to Russell Martin because, after Sunderland, he said it was terrible. After Gillingham, he said it was terrible, and he took responsibility for those. So I thought it was going to be the same again. And then when the quotes start coming through that he's proud, and then he comes in and says the same thing to us, it was a bit of a surprise. I see certain bits of where he's coming from, but yeah, it's not good enough, is it? I spoke to Russell on Monday at Staplewood before the game, and we actually sort of chatted about this reputation for not having any give and for keeping the same tactics constantly. And he said, although the idea is we'll play with Plan A the whole time, there will be tweaks. We're not naive. We're not stupid. So I'm interested to see what those tweaks are on Tuesday, because there's going to have to be a few.
Yeah, Tuesday's going to be huge, isn't it? Well, I want to get onto that interview that you did and the time you spent with him. So maybe we'll do that at the end if we've got a bit of time. Glenn, if we're defending him, you look at the time he's been at the club, the drama, the uncertainty of the transfer window, and then there was the international break. I think Alfie pointed out, I think 4 of the starting 11 were training this week. He's had a lot to deal with. You then chuck in the injuries. You've got Stevens and Bednarek, who were both out. You think they might have made a difference had they played on Friday. So he just needs a bit of time, right?
He does, but we can't be getting thrashed like this. Because it's just. I mean, that game as a supporter was a miserable experience from the 20th second onwards. It was abysmal. It just sat there, and it's like, oh my word, this is awful. It was on a par with any of the dreadful games last season, apart from Nottingham Forest. It was just awful, because I never felt like we were getting anything out of the game. Even at 2-1, you could say there's going to be another mistake. There just seemed to be no pattern to the game. The only thing that I can think of in terms of mitigating, any mitigation, is that maybe it was some sort of tactical thing that he'd come up with specifically for the Leicester game. Yes, it didn't work, but hopefully it was just something that he'd come up with for that particular game that didn't work, and we're not going to try and do that again. Because if you play that open against anybody, you're going to be letting in at least 2 goals. In any game against any opposition, if you play like that, you're going to let in at least 2. And then you're relying on our strikers to hit the net 3 times. And, Che Adams had another one of those, manages to hit the goalkeeper from anywhere sort of games.
Adam Armstrong as well.
Adam Armstrong was dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. He picked up the ball a couple of times, drove into space, and he just thought, oh, here we go. This is what he's good at now. And just gave the ball away, or the shooting was terrible.
I thought there was no ownership on the pitch, though. Nobody sort of took responsibility of anything. They had that short free kick where they just passed it 5 yards, and then they completely left it, and Leicester were through on goal because they just ran the length of the pitch.
It wasn't until Alcaraz and Stuart Armstrong came on that I thought people actually looked like they wanted to do something, and the game was dead by then. But those two, I thought, added a little bit that wasn't there before. But Russell Martin's got to get the balance right. As Steve said, the midfield, there was no balance in that midfield at all. There was no real grit in there. He's got to accept Will Smallbone is not a defensive player at all. It just isn't. And if you use him as one of the defensive players, it just is not going to work. He's a sort of number 8/10, the same as Stuart Armstrong, same as Alcaraz, and so my criticism of Russell Martin is he's got to get the balance right between our attacking and our defending. I mean, we joked about the rest defense thing last year because that was all we were concerned about. The Ruben Sellers picking 11 defenders basically, but you can't play with, at times in the second half, you've got Shea Charles closing down people on the halfway line and just 2 defenders behind him, one of which is Ryan Manning, and he's not the best defender. So it's just absolutely mad. So I'm not sort of advocating that Russell Martin needs to go or anything like that. Of course not. But I feel that he just needs to get back to basics. You can do complicated things if you are getting to the stage where the basics are nailed down. Then you can try and tweak it, and you can play your fullbacks in midfield if that's what you want to do. But for now, the players don't seem to get whatever it is he's telling them to do, as Kyle Walker-Peters said. So just pick a back 4, put 2 defensive midfield players in front of it, and go from there, and see what happens. Because if we play like we did against Leicester, we'll get beat by Ipswich as well. So yeah, there's a few question marks, and it's not okay for Russell Martin to finish 13th this year, like it has been when he was at Swansea, like it was when he was at MK Dons. We've got to be better than that. And I'm not saying that we're entitled to finish in the top 6. We're not. And if we play like we did yesterday, we certainly won't.
Going to be nowhere near it. Steve, just quickly, I guess what happens next for you? I mean, does he stick to his guns with the way we're playing out from the back, and just somehow work on switching out and stopping the mistakes, or is it a different style, change of personnel? Because we've got to stop conceding 4 goals every game somehow.
Well, I mean, the long and short of it is we don't have time to be coming up with a whole new system and changing things wholesale, because we played on a Friday night, we got a next game Tuesday, and we got another game Saturday. You don't have enough training sessions in the week to be able to come up with a new system that we've presumably not worked on, because plan A was plan A and it's also plan B from the start of pre-season. That's kind of where we've kind of expected to be. We knew that was, I think that's kind of what you kind of almost accept when you appoint a sort of ideologue as a manager, when they've got one way that they want to play and they're going to play it. So you don't work on anything else. So I think realistically, the only changes that can be made are likely to be personnel. Must admit, I was surprised Che Adams started Friday, given that he'd started for Scotland only 3 days previous and had basically been given the complete runaround by England at Hampden Park.
That was his first start too, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah. No, he started at Plymouth as well, didn't he? I think.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, he's not played an awful lot, but yes, that's probably even more surprising that he got the start in this one. But I guess
it's not him, who is it? Adam Armstrong.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, then I guess you're then looking into the sort of false nine front three where. I mean, we've had a lot of false nines over the years, haven't we?
One of them scored today, didn't he?
Yes. Yeah, and it's I mean, I guess in that situation you kind of look at it and think, well, okay, who else is there? But then if you're putting a player out there who's not going to be able to do it for 90 minutes or even for an hour, then I mean, you probably not got the right guys in there. So yeah, it's frustrating that we're already in sort of backpedaling mode and saying, okay, how do we fix this? I mean, ultimately we've got to get through this month. And actually one of the fixtures that is surprisingly actually going to be sort of one of those where you could look to get yourself back on the road is that game on Saturday at Middlesbrough, because they've been surprisingly awful. And I mean, I know they get to play Sheffield Wednesday on Tuesday night, so they might play themselves back into form. But having lost basically their two key players from last season, they've not really started this season. I think they got a point from a point so far all season. So. Yeah, I mean, we obviously know what will happen now on Saturday, but yeah, I think you're now looking at these two games. I think you've got to just steady the ship, but how you do it realistically with the time available, it's personnel. You're chopping and changing and just trying to stumble upon the right combination. But I think that's got to start with that base of midfield, and Shea Charles has got to play there. You pick the centre backs behind him based on who else is available. If it's Mason Holgate, it's Mason Holgate. Fine.
Bednarek should be back, so that's a boost.
Well, if he is, then that probably solves that problem immediately. Then doesn't it?
It's not often we've said that on this podcast, is it? Bednarek's back, and that's going to be a boost. Just before we put the game to bed, I'm going to ask you for a player of the week as well. Alfie, just on the red cards. I mean, I was in the car on the way home by then. So. Red, do you think, or do you think they're going to appeal it? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think Glenn's assessment before we went on air was correct, that Boy Madley hadn't anything to do all game, and therefore he just wanted a chance to steal the light. And I don't think it's a red card, to be honest. I can see people say that the studs were up and it went down onto the player, but I asked Russell Martin about it after, and they will appeal if they think there's grounds to, but he hadn't seen it back at the time, so not too much to report on that really. But I'd like to think they'll appeal it, but he's not available for Tuesday in any case. I mean, how long does that take, Stephen? Glenn's usually a week or two.
Because of the fact that there is a game Tuesday, they can put the appeal in Monday and they'll hear it that day.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it should be more or less instant.
Well, yeah, that's good, because if Samadozi's gone off for knock and isn't fit for Tuesday, then they're down to Ryan Fraser and Sekou Mara on the wing again. So they could probably do with him.
Well, Morris seemed to do quite well on international duty, so maybe he's a guy.
They all do when they're away.
They all do, yeah. Under 21s football as well. So,
player of the week for you, Steve. Anyone stand out?
There's only really two options for me. I mean, Gavin Bazunu had one of his best games for us, which is frankly a ridiculous thing to say when we've lost 4-1 at home. But I thought he was very good. Made a handful of really good saves. That one in the first half was excellent. I thought the one where he tipped the shot wide. Yeah. From Ndidi, I think was it? From possibly. Distance. And yeah, I think his distribution is getting better. He's playing in a system now which suits that style, which it didn't last season. That's for sure.
I think he's brave as well, to be fair, when he's on the ball, because he gets there's a lot of G's to get it forward and stuff, but he never seems to. And when he does, he usually picks the right time, in fairness.
Yeah. Glenn, standout player for you?
Yeah, and Bednarek. He became a better player through not playing.
Yeah, well, we had
in
that last week,
in
didn't
that
we?
shambles.
But,
Honestly, well, yeah, I mean, sensible answer. Bazuni's the only one that I could
Yeah.
pick. The rest of them were crap. So I got absolutely nothing to say about the rest of the players. I mean, Armstrong and Alcaraz, I mentioned that they only played 20 minutes each or whatever.
Dozy, possibly.
I'll chuck
a
in
nice
a
finish from
Dozy
Dozy,
at a
yeah.
push.
Yeah,
nice
Dozy
thing.
at
Maybe get
a
better.
push for half the game, but no, Bednarek for me.
Same for you, Alfie?
Yeah, there's nothing more to say about that, is there really?
Okay.